Hello, welcome to the channel.
The video was created and narrated by the channel Henry Ford's Wisdom. How to stop being afraid and start acting. I was not born into greatness. I was born on a farm in Greenfield Township, Michigan in 1863. We did not have riches, nor did I possess some genius that others could not understand. What I had, wine, and what I still believe to be the most powerful force a person can cultivate, was a relentless desire to act, and an equally relentless rejection of fear. You see, fear is the greatest enemy of progress. It is not failure, as many would assume. No, failure is merely the tuition you pay for learning. But fear prevents you from enrolling in the school of action in the first place. When I was a boy, my father hoped I would grow up to inherit the farm, to tend to the land, to live a simple, steady life. There was nothing wrong with that path, but I knew in my heart that it was not my path. I was not fascinated by plows and planting. I was captivated by machines. I remember the first time I saw a self-propelled steam engine, how it thundered with purpose and life. It stirred something in me, a hunger. But along with that hunger came fear. What if I disappointed my family? What if I failed in my mechanical pursuits? What if I was laughed at for dreaming beyond the horizon of our farmland? These were not idle thoughts. They haunted me. At night I would lie awake, hearing the voice of doubt whisper, "You are nothing more than a farmer's son. Who do you think you are?" But here's the thing, and I want you to remember this. Fear only has power over you when you stop moving. The moment you take one step forward, fear begins to shrink. So I began building. I didn't have money or formal education or blueprints. What I had was my hands, my curiosity, and the willingness to fail forward. My first gasoline engine didn't start. My first self-propelled vehicle was a mess. People scoffed. Newspapers mocked me. Investors walked away. But every failure taught me something. Every setback was a lesson in disguise. And most importantly, I was acting. I was doing. I was no longer imprisoned by what if. Now I understand that most people don't act not because they're lazy, but because they're afraid. They are afraid of judgment, afraid of poverty, afraid of losing time, of wasting effort, of being wrong. But let me tell you this, and hear me loud. Inaction is the true failure. I didn't build the Model T because I was braver than others. I built it because I had trained myself to act in the presence of fear. I had trained myself to embrace motion, even when the road ahead was unclear. Let me take you through how I did it, how I stopped being afraid and started acting, and perhaps how you can too. Step 1. Understand the nature of fear. Fear is not always a villain. It is a survival mechanism. In the wild, it kept our ancestors alive. But in the modern world, fear often disguises itself as logic. You say, "I can't do this yet because the timing isn't right." Or, "I need more information before I can begin." Or, "What if people laugh?" These are not logical statements. They are rationalizations for avoidance. You must recognize fear when it puts on the mask of caution. Ask yourself, is this truly a wise delay, or is this fear masquerading as reason? I did this every day. When I postponed taking the risk of starting my own company, I told myself it was because I needed more experience. The truth, I was scared. Scared of leaving a stable job. Scared of failing in front of others. Once I admitted that to myself, I could start working through it. Step 2. Build small victories. Confidence is not something you are born with. It is something you build, piece by piece, like an engine. When I first tried to build a working internal combustion engine, I did not succeed. But I didn't try to build a car right away either. I started with simpler mechanisms. I fixed broken watches. I assembled bicycles. Every small success chipped away at my fear. So do the same. Don't try to conquer Everest on your first day out. Win small. Get used to progress. Let your mind associate action with reward, not with terror. Every time I took something apart and managed to put it back together, I felt a surge of power. A quiet voice in my head grew louder. You are capable. Step 3. Expect resistance and welcome. I must have heard no 1,000 times. People told me cars were a fad, that horses were better, that machinery was dangerous, that mass production was foolish. But I never expected support. I expected resistance. Because when you try to do something different, something bold, you threaten the comfortable patterns of others, and people will often ridicule what they do not understand. So don't be surprised when resistance appears. Be surprised when it doesn't. In fact, learn to welcome resistance. If people are skeptical, that means you're probably onto something new, something worthwhile. Step 4, make peace with failure. I want to speak plainly now. Failure is not the end. It is not even a detour. It is the path itself. If you expect to avoid failure on the road to achievement, then you are not on the road. You are standing still. I failed more times than I care to count. Before the success of the Ford Motor Company, I had already bankrupted 2 businesses. My designs were too complex, too expensive, or too early for the market. People walked away from me. Investors withdrew their support. Journalists said I was finished. But I did not stop. Because here is what failure really is: an education with a high tuition fee. Every time I failed, I did not say, I am a failure. I said, that failed. What's next? That single distinction can transform a man's life. Your ideas are not you. Your results are not you. You are the engine, not the destination. Step 5, surround yourself with action-oriented people. When I began assembling my team, I did not look for the smartest men in the room. I looked for those who had the hunger to build, to move, to act, the dreamers and the doers. You can waste years in the company of the fearful. They will pull you back to the familiar, to the safe, to the known. They will infect your thinking with hesitation and limit your vision. Instead, find those who lean forward, who experiment, who do not let mistakes define them. In my factories, I valued those who tried and failed more than those who refused to try at all. An idle man with a clean record is worth less than a daring man with a record full of missteps. Your environment is either your cage or your catalyst. Choose wisely. Step 6. Clarity comes from action. Many people believe they must wait until they know exactly what to do. They wait for the full blueprint, the perfect plan, the guaranteed outcome. But clarity does not precede action, it follows it. I did not have a master plan for the assembly line. It was born out of motion, out of necessity, out of watching how pigs were disassembled in meatpacking plants in Chicago and thinking, what if we did the reverse for building cars? One insight leads to another. One step leads to the next. You do not need to see the whole road. You only need to see the next step. So take it. Step 7. Focus on service, not approval. People often ask me how I handled criticism. The truth is, I didn't seek applause. I sought usefulness. I wanted to create something that served people, something that solved problems. That goal is what sustained me when others laughed, doubted, or resisted. You must learn to shift your attention from self-image to service. If your idea helps people, if your actions create value, you will endure. You will grow. Even if the world doesn't clap at first. I didn't build the Model T to be admired. I built it so that the common man could afford to travel freely. That purpose gave me strength when the markets dipped, when competitors scoffed, when journalists questioned my sanity. Serve and keep serving. The applause will come later, and if it doesn't, you won't care. Step 8. Discipline over motivation. Many people wait to feel ready or motivated before they act. That is a mistake. Motivation is like the wind. Pleasant when it arrives, but unreliable. Discipline is like the engine. Consistent, dependable, built for endurance. When I rose each morning, I didn't ask myself whether I felt like working on an engine. I simply went to the workshop. I tinkered. I tested. I moved. Waiting for motivation is another form of fear. It disguises itself as preparation, but it is still waiting. Discipline, routine, structure, persistence will carry you across the chasms that motivation cannot. Step 9. Think long, act now. I believe deeply in long-term vision. I did not want to sell a few cars to the elite. I wanted to change how America and the world moved. I wanted to reshape labor, industry, and mobility. But even with that big vision, I acted each day in small, immediate ways. One bolt tightened, One idea tested, one problem solved. People who think long but act never remain dreamers. People who act without vision remain busy but ineffective. But those who can do both, who can see far and step forward now, build empires, dream big, start small, move fast. Step 10, the clock is ticking. Perhaps the most powerful motivator of all is this: you do not have forever. Time is the great equalizer. No man, however rich or poor, receives more of it than another. And every moment you spend paralyzed by fear is a moment wasted. You do not need to feel ashamed of your fear, but you must refuse to obey it. When I was approaching 50, many said I was too old to reinvent transportation, that the age of innovation belonged to younger men. But age is not the enemy. Hesitation is. You must begin before you are ready, before the timing is perfect, before you feel fearless, because fear fades in the face of action, and momentum will carry you forward. So I leave you with this: stop waiting, start building. The world doesn't need more ideas, it needs more people who act. I often think back to the early nights in that little workshop of mine, dimly lit, cold in the Michigan winters, filled with nothing but scrap metal, crude tools, and unreasonable ambition. There were no guarantees back then, no applause, no roadmaps. Just me, a few tools, and the pounding thought in my head: there must be a better way. You see, people often assume courage is loud, that it's a speech, a bold gesture, a moment of glory. But more often, courage is quiet. It's turning the key in the ignition one more time after the last 100 attempts failed. It's waking up to another day of ridicule and moving forward anyway. It's walking into the factory when there's not enough money to make payroll and still trying to figure out how to keep your men working. The nights I was most afraid were not the ones filled with obstacles. No, those were clear. You can fight an obstacle. You can fix a problem. The most terrifying nights were the ones filled with silence, when no one believed in what I was doing, when failure was not dramatic but quiet, when the world simply didn't seem to care. But I've learned this: if you wait for the world to validate your dreams before you act, you'll die waiting. The world doesn't validate potential. It rewards results. And results only come from motion, even when your knees are shaking. Especially then, there was a time, before the Model T, before the assembly line, before the name Ford meant anything, when I nearly gave up. My first company had failed. I had taken on partners who didn't share my vision. They wanted quick profits. I wanted lasting change. They called me stubborn. Maybe I was, but I couldn't compromise the idea that cars should be for everyone, not just the rich. The world didn't need another toy for millionaires. It needed a tool for the working man, a car he could buy, fix, and rely on. It sounds obvious now, but at the time it was madness. Every time I pitched this idea, I was told it was impossible, too expensive, too complicated. People will never drive those things. I had to drown out those voices with the sound of hammers, wrenches, gears turning. I had to let actions speak where words failed, and slowly, results came. The Model T wasn't perfect at first, but it was simple, affordable, and durable. We built it not for luxury, but for liberation. We weren't selling a car, we were selling freedom. Freedom to move, freedom to travel, freedom to dream beyond your zip code. Do you know what happened next? We couldn't build them fast enough. Demand exploded. And with that demand came a new problem. How could we keep up? That's when I turned to the idea of the moving assembly line, not to make men work harder, but to make the system smarter. I believe that workers should not suffer for progress. In fact, they should benefit from it. So we raised wages to $5 a day. People thought I was insane. Why pay workers so much? They asked. You're destroying business. But I wasn't destroying anything. I was building. When a man earns a good wage, he can afford the very product he helps build. He becomes a customer, not just a laborer. He finds dignity in his work. He sends his children to school. He becomes invested in progress. Some called it foolish. History now calls it revolutionary. But it wasn't genius that led to that decision. It was action. It was listening. It was seeing with my own eyes what fear had blinded others to. Because when you stop being afraid of profit margins for just a moment and start thinking about people, real people, everything changes. In my later years, I often sat back and watched those long lines of cars filling the roads. Not just in America, but around the world. Families driving to see relatives. Young couples off to start a life. Soldiers returning home. Workers commuting. Dreams unfolding across highways that hadn't existed just a few decades earlier. I never forgot where it began. In that little shed, surrounded by silence, fear, and metal. And I never forgot that it only moved forward because I acted. So if you right now are standing in your own metaphorical shed, uncertain, afraid, perhaps alone, I say this to you. Move. Just move. Don't wait for the blueprint. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for the fear to go away. It won't. But you don't need it to go away. You just need to act anyway. When I look back, I realize how many times my path could have ended differently. Not because of a single failure, but because of a single hesitation. I often wonder how many brilliant minds the world has never known because they were too afraid to take the first step. I wonder how many life-changing inventions were left in a notebook. How many revolutions were smothered in the cradle of, what if it doesn't work? The truth is, I am not extraordinary. I never thought of myself as particularly intelligent, and I certainly wasn't fearless. What separated me from others was that I acted anyway. I still remember vividly one moment. I was standing outside my third failed workshop. A group of men had just walked out, leaving me behind after we couldn't reach an agreement. The business was folding, money was gone, supplies were depleted, my hands were cut and stained with oil, and I was left with nothing but my idea that an automobile could be something more than a luxury. And I remember thinking, you can walk away now, and no one would blame you. But then came another thought, sharper, quieter, but more persistent. If you walk away now, you'll spend the rest of your life wondering what might have happened if you didn't. And I couldn't live with that, so I walked back inside, sat alone in the workshop, and began sketching again. That night, I didn't build a car, I didn't build a business, but I built something far more important. I built resolve. You must understand, resolve is not willpower. Willpower fades. Resolve becomes a part of you. Once you've made up your mind to move forward, regardless of how long or hard the road may be, you become very difficult to stop. I've spoken with many men in my life who were more talented than I ever was. Some were gifted thinkers, some skilled craftsmen, some natural leaders, and yet most of them never built what they dreamed of. They had the ingredients, but they lacked the heat to set it all in motion. Fear had taken root. It had dressed itself in excuses, and they bought every one of them. I have a family to support. It's not the right time. Someone else is already doing it. I'm not ready yet. Excuses are the bricks in the wall that separates dreams from reality. And they're all made from fear. But here's what I discovered. When you begin acting in spite of fear, something remarkable happens. The world begins to bend toward you. Opportunities appear. People emerge. Ideas take shape. You attract momentum. Fear is loudest before the first step. After that, it becomes background noise. Even later in life, when the company was thriving, when I was being asked to speak at banquets and write editorials, the fear didn't vanish. It just changed shape. It became fear of complacency, fear of being misunderstood, fear of becoming a monument instead of a man in motion. Because success brings its own kind of paralysis if you're not careful. You begin to protect instead of build. You begin to defend instead of innovate. That's why I never allowed the company to rest on what we had done. We had to keep evolving, not because we needed more money or recognition, but because stillness is the beginning of death, even in business. You must never let your past victories become your prison. Celebrate them, yes. Learn from them, but don't live in them. That's one of the reasons I stepped back from daily operations in my later years. I didn't want the Ford Motor Company to become the Ford Memory Museum. I wanted it to remain a living machine, run by new minds, driven by fresh ideas, capable of mistakes and triumphs alike. People ask me what I am most proud of. Some expect me to say the Model T. Others, the assembly line. Some think it's the wage revolution we sparked. But truly, it is that I started, that I didn't let fear, failure, or convention stop me from trying. Everything else came from that. Because once you start, really start, the world is never quite the same again. Not for you, not for anyone. And now, if you're reading this and you've been waiting for the perfect time, waiting for courage, waiting for someone to give you permission, let this be it. Let this be the moment where you say, I will act, I will move, I will build, even if I'm afraid. And if you do that, if you take that first trembling, uncertain, imperfect step, then you've already outrun 90 of the world. And perhaps one day someone will look at your story and say, that man, that woman, they stopped being afraid. And because of that, the world moved forward. As I grew older, I realized that the essence of a life well lived is not measured in dollars or fame. It is measured in impact, the difference you make, the lives you touch, the possibilities you create for others. When I look back at my years, I don't see just cars or factories. I see people, workers who found dignity in honest labor, families who gained the freedom to explore the world beyond their small towns, young minds inspired to imagine new inventions. That, to me, is legacy. But legacy is not something you plan with blueprints or market studies. It is a byproduct of consistent action, of showing up every day and choosing to build, to improve, to serve. I often wonder what the world would be like if more men and women chose action over fear. If they had dared to dream louder, to act faster, to endure longer. I believe progress is not the work of heroes alone, but of ordinary people who simply refuse to be stopped by their doubts. Each of us holds a spark, sometimes buried deep under layers of worry and hesitation, but that spark can ignite a flame, and that flame can light a path, not just for yourself, but for countless others who follow. So I urge you, not just as an inventor or industrialist, but as a man who has walked the hard path from doubt to achievement. Do not let fear steal your time. Do not let doubt silence your voice. Do not let hesitation rob the world of your gift. The world is waiting, not for perfection, but for motion, for someone willing to take the first step, stumble, learn, and keep moving forward. Remember this, the greatest failure is to never begin. Every moment you hesitate, someone else moves past you. Every moment you choose safety over risk, the world shifts without you. But every moment you act, you reclaim your power. You become the master of your destiny, and in that, you find true freedom. This is my message to you, from the man who once stood where you stand now. The road is not easy, it never was. But it is yours to walk. Take the first step, then the next, and keep walking, no matter the fear, because that is how progress is made. That is how legacies are born. That is how the world moves forward. Leadership, I have come to understand, is not about commanding others from a pedestal. It is about inspiring action, first in yourself, then in those who follow. A true leader is not defined by the number of people behind him, but by the courage he demonstrates in the face of uncertainty. I learned this lesson the hard way. When I first gathered a team to build what would become the Ford Motor Company, many doubted me. Even some of my closest allies questioned whether my vision was attainable. But instead of trying to convince them with words, I showed them through relentless action. I arrived early, worked late, and refused to accept excuses. I made it clear that fear had no place in our workshop. If a man was afraid to try, he could not stay. It was not an easy environment. It demanded discipline, resilience, and unwavering commitment. But it also cultivated innovation, pride, and a shared purpose. Over time, the men who stayed learned that fear was a choice, and that they could choose courage instead. Character is built in those moments, not when all is easy, but when all is difficult. When you face failure, when you are criticized, when the world doubts your resolve, it is your character that will keep you moving. And character is not something bestowed upon you by birth. It is forged in the fire of action, persistence, and integrity. If you want to stop being afraid and start acting, begin by building your character. Cultivate habits of discipline, embrace responsibility, and hold yourself accountable. Never allow yourself to be a prisoner of excuses. Excuses are easy. They comfort us in the short term, but enslave us in the long term. Replace excuses with commitments. Replace fear with faith. Faith in your ability to learn, to adapt, and to overcome. Remember, the greatest barrier between you and your dreams is often the story you tell yourself about why you cannot proceed. Change that story. Rewrite it with action, with persistence, with courage. And when doubt creeps back, as it inevitably will, remind yourself of all the steps you have already taken. Each step forward is proof that you can continue. So to all who stand on the edge of fear, I say, leap, fall if you must, but leap, because the ground you land on will be firmer than the one you left behind. Patience is a virtue that many misunderstand. In a world that prizes speed and instant results, patience is often mistaken for passivity or weakness. But I have learned that true patience is not waiting idly. It is persistent action over time, even when progress seems slow or invisible. When I was developing the Model T, it took years of trial and error. Many times I wanted to rush, to see immediate success, to prove the skeptics wrong overnight. But I quickly realized that meaningful innovation requires time. Time to test, to fail, to refine. I was patient not because I had the luxury to wait, but because I had the conviction to endure. The men and women who stop acting are often those who lost patience before the breakthrough. They confuse delay with defeat. But in reality, every great achievement is a sum of countless small actions, repeated day after day, fueled by unwavering belief. Belief, that is the silent engine behind all success. Belief in your vision, even when others do not see it. Belief in your strength, even when you feel weak. Belief in the possibility of a better future, even when the present looks bleak. I remember a time when investors pulled out, when the economy was unstable, and the future of the company seemed uncertain. Many advised me to sell, to give up the dream, to settle. But I believed. I believed in the car that would change transportation. I believed in the workers who built it, I believed in the customers who would one day own it, and that belief carried me through the darkest hours. So if you want to stop being afraid and start acting, cultivate patience and nurture belief. Let them be the wings on which your action soars, because without patience, even the strongest efforts can falter. And without belief, the longest journey is futile. Remember, progress is not always visible in the moment. Sometimes it is invisible, a seed growing beneath the soil, waiting for the right moment to break through. Now, as I bring these reflections to a close, I want you to remember this. Fear is a natural part of being human. It will visit you often, in moments of uncertainty, in times of change, in the face of the unknown. But fear is not your master unless you let it be. The greatest gift you can give yourself is the courage to move despite fear. Action is the antidote. Movement is the remedy. When you take that first step, shaky, imperfect, uncertain, you declare to the world and to yourself that you will not be held captive any longer. Your life, your dreams, your purpose, they are yours to claim. And remember, progress is never a straight line. There will be setbacks, failures, and days when the road seems impossibly long, but every step forward is a victory over fear. Every act of courage, no matter how small, reshapes your destiny. So do not wait for fear to vanish. It will not. Do not wait for perfect conditions. They will never come. Instead, step boldly into the unknown. Build with your hands, think with your heart, and move with your soul. Because the world does not reward those who wait. It rewards those who act. I stand here not as a man who was fearless, but as a man who refused to let fear stop him. And so can you. Stop fearing. Start acting. The future belongs to those who dare.